If we were to look at the music industry over the last decade and a half, only a handful of artists who were topping charts in the early 2000s and early 2010s are still relevant today on a mainstream level, which makes it even more remarkable that a kid from Canada has been able to solidify himself as one of the greats in a genre dominated by African Americans. Drake was born on the 24th of October 1986 in Toronto, Canada, to Dennis and Sandra Graham. His dad, an African American drummer from Tennessee, met Sandra, who's Jewish Canadian, at the famous Blue Notes Club in the early 1980s. Drake's parents would go on to divorce when he was just 5 years old. He remained in Canada with his mum while his dad moved back to Memphis, only seeing him in the summers when Graham would take Drake on road trips to the south. He's gone on record stating his parents could have done a better job at co-parenting despite the split. Drake spent his early years in Weston Road, a working-class suburb in Toronto's northern suburbs, a place that was an inspiration for his record Weston Road Flows, which peaked at number 54 on the Billboard Hot 100. As most Canadians would, Drake played hockey and was promising as a kid. However, Sandra feared for his safety, and that was that. At 14, they moved to Forest Hills, an affluent neighborhood just north of downtown Toronto, but as Drake would describe it, their life was far from affluent, essentially living in the basement of the joint. He attended Vaughan Road Academy, where he was bullied for his racial ambiguity and religious background.
I went, when I was in Forest Hill, it was an all Jewish school, and just being biracial, but still being Jewish, so I was kind of connected to the kids, but sort of distant. And when kids are young, they don't necessarily comprehend everything.
Right.
So it can get a little cruel and a little mean.
Do you get teased a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I got it, I got it.
Despite that, he did well in school. His witty and outgoing nature was just the catalyst that propelled him to his first big break. He auditioned for the hit show Degrassi at the suggestion of a classmate whose father worked in the industry as a talent agent. He would go on to play the role of Jimmy Brooks, a budding basketball star who becomes disabled after being shot by a classmate. After a clash of schedules and seeing the living conditions of he and his mum, he dropped out of school and focused purely on acting, stating they were dirt poor and his mum couldn't work due to her illness. Drake stayed on the show for 7 years, but all along he knew his real passion was music. Oftentimes he would rock up late to set after staying up all night working on his music. While still acting on Degrassi, he dropped his debut mixtape Room for Improvement in early 2006. Despite featuring notable up-and-comers like Lupe and Trey Songz, it was average at best, which is understandable considering it was a debut project. It sold a modest 6,000 copies. Most of the mixtape was recorded at his childhood friend Mazen El-Sadig's house and produced by then up-and-coming Canadian producer Boy Wonder, who himself would go on to produce some of Drake's biggest records. The following year he put out his second project, Comeback Season, which was mediocre to say the least, although Replacement Girl, which featured Trey Songz, did well and even got him a feature on BET as the first unsigned Canadian rapper to feature on the platform. By 2008, Drake was done with Degrassi, and his acting days behind him, he put all his effort into his music career, dropping his third mixtape, So Far Gone, in February of 2009, a project that featured several A-listers and was the catalyst that launched him to the mainstream. Record labels were quick to take notice, and he became the subject of an intense bidding war. Kinda like Kanye, Drake was a breath of fresh air, a likable guy with the perfect mix of supreme confidence, image, and musical talent to go along with it. After many meetings around the country, he would go on to sign with Wayne's Young Money label in the summer of 2009, and after multiple delays, he dropped his debut album, Thank Me Later, in June of that same year, selling nearly 500,000 copies first week, and some insane hits on there like Miss Me, Up All Night, Over, and Fancy. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, even earning him a nomination for Best Rap Performance at the Grammys. But despite all that, it felt like 2010 was just a warm-up for Drake. The industry was red hot and teeming with talent from Usher, Beyonce, Rihanna, Chris Brown, and the White Pop Girls. He still hadn't quite reached that A-list status yet, as many were eager to see whether he can replicate the success or go out a one-hit wonder like many artists. 2011 rolls around and it felt like everyone was just waiting to see what Drake did next. Thank Me Later was still doing numbers on the charts. He would wait until November 2011 to drop his second album, owing it to feeling rushed the first time around. This time he had all the heavy hitters on the album, selling 631,000 copies in its first week alone, and in just 8 years, certified 6 times platinum. The album was described by many as a masterpiece, and it really was, literally hit after hit. Now in my opinion, this 4-year stretch is the greatest era of music ever. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was just having a field day. DJ Mustard, Coldplay, Halsey, Pharrell, Nicki, Beyonce, Rihanna, Kanye. Man, the roster was so deep, I could go on forever. But for Drake, this period was when he really solidified his standing as the best in the game. He dropped his third studio album, Nothing Was the Same, in September 2013 and again outdid himself, straight to #1 in several countries, selling almost 700,000 copies in its first week and has since gone 6 times platinum. Just 17 months later, he came out with his 4th studio album. If you're reading this, it's too late. The album kinda dropped out of nowhere, no promo, nothing, and still did numbers, breaking the record for most Spotify streams in a week, which was also held by Drake previously. It ended up selling over 1 million units for the 2015 calendar year, making Drake the first artist to achieve the feat in 2015. The album had 19 tracks, with 6 Gold and Energy being the most notable. Later that year, he released the What a Time to Be Alive mixtape with Future, which is quite underrated for the bangers on there. As of today, it's certified double platinum. By 2016, it felt like alt-rap was the big new wave that everyone was on, with new faces like 21, Uzi, Yachty, X, among a host of others. It felt like the industry was trending in a new direction, so in April of that year, Drake gave us Pop Style and One Dance, 2 of the lead singles on his latest project, Views, with the latter being a smash hit, reaching #1 in 9 different countries. One Dance was the first time we see Drake branching out to that Afrobeat sound, which at the time was not as popular as it is today. Myself personally, I wasn't a huge fan of the album, and despite the large commercial success, it just felt too watered down. But there are some hits on there: Feel No Ways, One Dance, and Controller, with the latter being my favorite. But it's arguable that Tory may have even outdone Drake on the remix. Of course, we can't forget Drake's feature on Rihanna's hit record Work, which truly was the album of 2016. 2017 rolls around, and in March he drops his More Life record, a 22-track mixtape that nevertheless became his 7th straight album to debut at #1. It achieved 61 million streams on Spotify and Apple Music in a single day, beating the previous record held by Ed Sheeran. By 2018, Drake hadn't even been in the game for a decade and really felt like he'd been around forever. In late 2017, there were rumors circulating that Drake would be working on a song together with Trippie that didn't eventuate, and the snippet ended up getting leaked, forcing his hand at dropping Scary Hours, a 2-song EP which dropped in January 2018. By April, he announced on IG he was releasing his 5th studio album. Scorpion would go on to drop in June of 2018, a 25-song album that in my opinion was Drake at his absolute peak. Most records that contain so many songs tend to have a lot of skips and filler joints, but this wasn't the case here. It felt like a different side of Drake, one never seen before, where his underrated lyricism was on show. It was quite evident on records like Survival, Non-Stop, I'm Upset, Emotionless, 8 out of 10, Sandra's Rose, and Talk Up. Not to mention the mainstream songs that were all the hype of 2018, God's Plan, Nice for What, and In My Feelings, with the latter being an internet smash hit thanks to the Kiki Challenge, a dance created by NYC comedian Shiggy. Along with this, he featured on Block Boy's smash hit Look Alive and the Migos' Walk It Like I Talk It. After Scorpion, it truly felt like he had elevated to all-time status, not just as a rapper, but as an all-time artist in general. The numbers don't lie. Between 2010 and 2018, every album he had debuted at #1. That can't be a coincidence. At the 2019 Grammys, Drake would go on to win his 4th Grammy, taking home the award for Best Rap Song. However, it wasn't without the controversy. In the midst of his speech, he went on to criticize the Grammys, leading them to abruptly cut off the recording. In June, he gave us the Best in the World pack as a celebratory gift for the Raptors' breakthrough NBA championship. He followed this up by dropping Care Package in August, a compilation album that featured songs between 2010 and 2016. And once again, he didn't disappoint. The 17-track record would earn him another #1 album in what seemed like the norm for Drake. By April 2020, he announced the release of another mixtape on social media as a precursor to the album scheduled for the release in the summer of that same year. Dark Lane demo tapes dropped in May and had some standouts on there like G4L featuring Future and Thug, From Florida with Love, and Losses. But in my opinion, his most memorable work for 2020 was Laugh Now Cry Later with Dirk. The song was a hit and the music video even better. Directed by David Myers at Nike's headquarters in Oregon, it featured several star cameos on there like KD, Odell, Marshawn, and at the time upcoming comedian Drewski.
No, it's been a long fight. It's been a long fight.
Due to the pandemic, Drake delayed the release of his 6th studio album, but by January 2021, it was confirmed that the album would be dropping later that year. And finally in September, he released Certified Lover Boy, selling 613,000 copies in its first week, and once again, going straight to #1. Around the same time, Kanye had Donda, and his promo was next level for that album. It seemed to be all the talk on social media. There was a kind of rivalry there between the fan bases, but as a huge fan of both, I think CLB was far better. There were just so many records in there that would hold up today, like Race My Mind, 7 AM on Bridal Path, and You Only Live Twice. In the last 2 years, he's had 3 projects, 2 solo albums, and a collaborative album with 21, all 3 going straight to #1. The collaborative one managed to beat out Taylor Swift's Midnight for #1. Me personally, it wasn't my favorite work of his. Both albums had nice hits on there like Soko Loco and Jimmy Crooks, but it just felt too generic, almost like dance music. And just a couple months ago, he released his latest album, For All the Dogs. This might be my least favorite album of his. My thing is that it just had too many tracks on there, and as Mozzie Reeves would describe it, it truly felt like an album without an end goal, just a bunch of tracks dumped on there along with questionable features. It's been a largely successful career for the kid from Toronto, and at only 38, he still has a lot left to give. While many may say he's not a rapper or he ain't original, the numbers simply don't lie, and the truth is, he's left a deep imprint on the industry. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. That's all today. See you in the next one.